episode, kind of weird. I'm not doing a continuation of the CIS benchmark series. We have a vendor to vendor peer webinar today. Us at Senteon, joined by Will Brooks at Fifthwall Solutions. So we are both here to talk about the CIS controls, but from two different point of views. So Senteon really focusing on the implementation, the hardening, and adherence to CIS. But we're going to hear a different point of view from Will and talk about Fifth Wall Solutions and insurance's point of view on the CIS controls. Really excited to dive into this with you, man.
Yeah, this is gonna be awesome. We just had a good 20-minute conversation before this where I just thought to myself, we should have just started because this was all really good stuff.
Oh,
And
the
it's just
little pregame commentary. That's what
yeah,
people like, right?
yeah, yeah. Crack open a nice seltzer.
I mean, it's almost Friday. It's December, so I think for most people, every day's Friday this month, right?
That's fair. It's almost seriously, especially next week. I'm not gonna be able to get a hold of anybody.
Yep, that's how our role goes. But no, it was an interesting kind of introduction, and from my point of view, I never really had a experience working with insurance or understanding the behind the scenes of how MSPs are having to work with insurance. And you basically gave me a little overview of how Fifth Wall Solutions works. And honestly, before we go too far deep into the topic, do you mind just trying to summarize a little bit who's Fifth Wall Solutions and go into a little bit about that process, how MSPs are working with cyber insurance now?
Yeah. So whether you like it or not, as an MSP, cyber insurance is becoming part of your world. It wasn't a decade ago. A decade ago it existed, but you didn't have to fill out forms. You weren't being asked about all these security controls that your clients might have in order to be eligible for a policy. But obviously when the pandemic happened and everyone started going remote, the floodgates opened and a lot of carriers started getting smacked with cyber claims. And we saw that as an opportunity to pivot and start an MSP channel where we partner with MSPs to effectively and it's cool that we're talking about CIS because we're
Mhm.
effectively treating cyber insurance as a framework in and of itself, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. But
Cyber insurance as a framework. I love that. We're gonna have
yeah,
to write that down and revisit that as a topic.
yeah, I call it the CIF, but of course F and S sound very similar, and it confuses people. So either way, the beauty of it is, hey, you know what? A lot of our MSP partners are able to now shift kind of the point of view from, oh, you're just bringing up this security control because you're trying to sell me something, to actually cyber insurance requires it, and MSPs are all about reducing risk, right? But you can't reduce it completely. So to be able to transfer more of it over to cyber insurance after you've reduced it as much as you can is a huge win for MSPs. So we help MSPs get their clients to a point where they're a good risk to carriers, and then we can go out as a wholesaler and get them the best pricing available and the best policies available.
Now, I don't want to spoil too much of the rest of the presentation because we're going to get into risk, liability, and I do love that you brought it up early. But you're right. MSPs, their goal is to mitigate the risk or allocate it in different areas to effectively, minimize the bad possibilities, right? So by having cyber insurance as almost another layer of a defense in-depth approach, that can help assist with that, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. And my own misconception of Fifth Wall going into this, I didn't realize you guys had a business before the MSP channel.
Yes.
So that was something that came out of necessity. Could you kind of explain what the experience has been from working with direct enterprises, if I assume, and
No.
now it's switching? Oh, okay.
So we were working with insurance agents. So a wholesale model, just to give a real simple explanation,
Sure.
wholesaling, the way it works is effectively you have access to a lot of carriers that maybe your standard agent wouldn't have access to. So the agent comes to you in order to access that additional carrier base. What we did is effectively adapt that wholesale model to MSPs now and say, hey, look, as the MSP, you're gaining access to all these carriers that the local agent down the street doesn't necessarily have access to. But yeah, before the world went remote and all
Yep.
these requirements were necessary for cyber, we worked primarily with agents, and we still have a huge agency network, and we love our agents; they're amazing. But we started there because it was so much easier to get insurance. So it was more about educating the agent on how to talk about it. Now
Mm,
it's the agent looks at these forms and are overwhelmed with all these security controls, and it's just crazy. So MSPs play a big role in that.
yep. And MSPs have a little bit more insight from what you're sharing behind the scenes, right? By working with the MSP direct, it provides what more insight possibly about that end client security posture. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, a lot of insurance forms. If you're an MSP listening in, I'm sure you've seen them. A lot of those forms today, they're very black and white. They say, "Do you have this security control? Yes or no?" And almost every MSP I talk to says, sort of." Right? And when that happens, now all of a sudden you recognize that carriers are asking a black and white question to a gray answer. Um, and what working direct with the MSP allows us to do is get complete information so that when we go to underwriters and we provide the actual realities of what these controls are, it really shores up the risk and makes sure that the underwriter gets exactly what the posture is of the client.
It's awesome to hear. All right, I want to hit you with my first little fun question. So a little would you rather. So let's say you were at an MSP and you were a technical manager, IT manager, director, and you had the option of either becoming CIS compliant, 153 safeguards, going through the process, or obtaining a CIS, I'm sorry, a cyber insurance policy. Which one would you prefer to do?
Probably get a policy, but only because it's easier.
Hmm.
um, but that doesn't so that's like a weirdly loaded slash
It was intended to be so.
incomplete. This is one of those black and white questions that doesn't have a black and white answer. But the reason I say that is when you think of cyber insurance, their control requirements are a lot less than maybe what CIS, I don't know what implementation group we're even talking right now, but um, there's going to be more required of the CIS framework than what a carrier would require. But at the same time, does that mean that the carrier is I almost try to treat the carrier as the baseline, right? I mean, I think
Mhm.
having an insurance policy is really important. If you don't have it, you can have all the CIS controls, but you can't eliminate the risk, right? So it gets to the point where get all the CIS controls in place, great, but don't neglect getting a policy now because you have those controls in place. Like the two have to play off each other, and I think that's the whether you're going to go just bare minimum for insurance policy or CIS, which I think is a better option, right? Let's not be bare minimum here. But if either way, if you're not getting the policy to follow through, then what's the point? You know?
I, I love that, and that's what I was really looking for, right? It wasn't supposed to be a true yes or no answer for you, right? I phrased it in a way where I wanted the longer explanation because the whole point of today is, why insurance doesn't care about CIS, but you should. So that's what I wanted to get at, and I think that's a great segue. Um, and honestly, I think that was a good introduction of Fifth Wall. But Will, do you mind just giving a 30-second intro of yourself, and then I'll intro myself. We'll get into the topic.
Yeah. So my name is Will Brooks. I'm the channel chief at Fifthwall Solutions. So my goal is to help MSPs recognize that there is an easier way to deal with insurance, and we have the solution for that. And I want to we lead a ton with education. So even this webinar, right? So
Yep.
we believe that it is primarily and first and foremost with education that we're going to be able to learn to solve these problems, and then we have the tools to back it up and we'll provide those. So rather than say, here's your shiny button, go play, it's let's teach about why this is important and then we'll provide you with your shiny buttons.
That's awesome. And I'm Zach, the co-host here today. So I'm co-founder and chief customer officer of Senteon. So what Senteon is, as I introed at the beginning, we're focusing on the actual implementation of these CIS controls. So where Will may be working with his MSPs saying, hey, where's the risk? Document this. Can you prove to me it's done? Senteon comes in and provides that attestation, assisting with implementation to the various controls that we do work in, and we're more on that piece of the puzzle. So awesome introduction. And we keep talking about CIS. Now, not sure if everyone in the audience knows about CIS, and let's just pop up this next slide for the background. And I'm curious to have you kick off, Will. When you first started working with MSPs and made this transition, is CIS part of the conversation? Do you bring this up to MSPs, or is this something that goes in months and months after you have a relationship with an MSP?
Well, CIS tends to come up, and maybe not CIS specifically, but frameworks across the board is the idea, and I would say the point where we get into conversations around frameworks is when you are looking to have the sales conversation with a client is um And I think we mentioned this at the pre-call a little bit. We were
Mhm.
talking about it, but when you have a framework, now you're able to line up your expectations for your client's path forward into security in a way that's easy for them to digest, easy for them to understand, and they're not looking at you as the MSP and saying, "Oh, well, you're just trying to sell me stuff." So we'll bring up CIS because I personally think that CIS is one of the easier to digest frameworks
Yep.
for people just because of the way it's laid out, right? It's very clear. You have your implementation groups, you have your kind of subsets, and a lot of them, especially in IG1 and a little bit of IG2, really align with the cyber insurance requirements. So it helps clients in kind of two ways. And one in our conversations with MSPs, we're not going to recommend a framework. We're not going to say, "Hey,
Okay.
you should use this one," but we'll bring it up because at the end of the day, if they're following that framework, then it helps to provide maturity to the client where they're realizing, "Oh, my security needs to be consistently improving." And that's really our goal, is to help MSPs mature their clients and not be stagnant when it comes to their security.
I mean, it doesn't sound like you're trying to directly sell anything. I mean, basically
Except
advocating for
insurance.
end of the call. Yeah, end of the story. That is where it is. But there's a lot that goes into it, and I love that Fifth Wall allows you to do educational content, join webinars like this, and just take a step back for those viewers who maybe haven't heard of CIS or why I asked that question. CIS is basically a globally recognized standard for cybersecurity. It's prescriptive recommendations of the best decision from a security point of view. So they're made up of 18 different controls that are then made up of 153 subcontrols. And then of all of those subcontrols, like Will said, there's things called implementation groups. Within there's the CIS benchmarks, but they're all broken up in ways to help the MSP or the enterprise or just the security engineer prioritize their time and eliminate the guessing. So, for example, I think Control One is asset inventory, and Control is Two is software asset inventory. This is a prioritized list to help the MSPs or the security engineers just prioritize their time, right? And eliminate that guessing. So that's why I love that Will is advocating for CIS, because these cyber insurance providers, until recently, in my experience, never really leveraged a standard. And that's really what I wanted to grill Will a little bit about today is if CIS is accepted as the gold standard, why doesn't insurance care? And let's just pull up this next slide and I'll let you talk towards that question.
Yeah. No, that's a great question, and I think that is a common question that we get from a lot of MSPs. And it I don't want to get super insurance nerdy right now, but just to explain the process a little bit, insurance requirements are based off of past data of that particular insurance company. So they're not looking at what some framework provider or a government official or someone has determined is the optimal approach to cybersecurity. What they're doing is taking their real world data and they're saying, "Hey, based on the security stack of clients that we've taken on as insureds and the losses that we've seen, so the claims that we've had to pay out and whatnot, what are the security controls that have led to a reduction in the number of claims we've had to pay?" So you might see one carrier differ from another carrier in terms of the security controls they require, because you would think, "Oh yeah, let's adhere to a framework like CIS." But in reality, if they had to completely adhere to a framework, then you have some of those really small businesses that probably can't afford to get to the point of um, that most of these frameworks require of them,
Sure.
being ineligible for cyber insurance because they're being asked to implement a ton of controls they can't afford to do. So the carriers have to kind of be realistic on
Hmm.
their end, but the problem is, and you hear it a lot, that carriers are kind of behind when it comes to good
Sure.
security. I do think that it's going to catch up eventually, and the only reason is because the data is going to catch up. Right
That
now, the reality is there's going to be new controls that come eventually, and it's going to change the game again and all that kind of stuff. But I do think there's going to be a bit of a catch up at some point here. But to answer your question, I mean, they're basing their requirements off of their own data.
so that I mean that's really I love that, because that's exactly what I've understood too from my limited research is they're leveraging their own historical data, their historical experience, and then creating these policies, these premiums, right? Now, Is that just, again, trying to be a little edgy, right? Is that just ignorance to the larger data size? Do they not know how to ingest it? Do they not care what happens outside of their bubble? Why is their own individual experience more important than the overall data that CIS or any standard provides?
I don't think that it's necessarily more important. I think it's the approach that insurance has always taken, the way it plays out. I mean, we do have to remember that this is an industry that has been around way longer than the CIS controls. But because of that, the industry has its approaches to the way it does things. Every carrier has always had their own appetites on things, but there are general agreed upon security controls, just like there are kind of, if you drive a car, you usually get a discount for something like daytime running lights, or if you
Yep.
have your defensive driving course or things like that, right? So there are like those agreed upon conditions, and those
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
all that's because as the carriers start to collect their data, the data is always going to kind of speak the same way. There may be little nuances and differences, but over time it becomes more clear. um, so it is an older model in the sense that we have data here and now that shows that these controls are great, but the carriers are saying, well, we're basing it on our own experiences here.
Hmm.
So there is that piece. I also think just from the insurance carrier perspective, like it is, we like to say that insurance is organized gambling. I mean, it's a weird way to phrase it, but I mean, they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, you can't insurance is highly regulated, right? So
Yep.
you can't ask the world of every single client that you bring up on board. So they have to kind of play based on different factors like revenue and industry and the size of the business and how many clients they might have or how many employees they might have. Like
Sure.
there's all these different moving parts, and the actuaries that play in the background of the insurance world, they're kind of creating these tables, and as the tables line up, that's how they get to their pricing data, right? So it's not a one size fits all thing. And so where most MSPs we work with are saying, "Hey, I've got this many clients with this many endpoints, and therefore this particular solution is going to cost them this much money." They look at insurance and they're saying, "Can you give us a ballpark?" And I'm like, "No," because it's all over the place. And so it's that type of challenge where you look at it from a logical perspective. Oh, adhere to the CIS framework. That makes logical sense. But
Yep.
they're looking at it and they're saying, actually, the logical sense for us is that we've calculated all this on our own. And it's just it's the merging of two different worlds, because you're taking cybersecurity, which is newer to the
Hmm. Hmm.
insurance world, and they're trying to adapt their older model of insurance to meet it. And there are changes coming, but that's I think the juxtaposition we're seeing right now.
And I love, because there is overlap, right? In the background discussion before we got here, we were mentioning 2FA, right?
Mhm.
2FA is something that's in the CIS controls, a recommendation to have that, right? And that is overlap. They hit the nail on the head. That is a correct thing to prioritize.
Mhm.
Where that sits in priority all depends on your risk profile, but they're getting it right. They're coming. So I love where you went with that. And honestly, let's show this next slide, because my next question is, what makes up these premiums? And you talked to this a little bit, and I highlighted it in red on this slide, but the risk profile analysis. Fifth Wall's in a really unique spot because you're actually working directly with the MSP a lot of the time, or all the time in this segment of your business, and you actually understand more about the internal security measures of that end client than you would if it was just going through an agent. How how does all of this additional data you guys gain matter to you, and how does that formalize the premiums and policies?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when you think of um getting pricing for your policy, right? When we brought it up before, like if you have with a car, if you have certain security measures in place, you're going to see discounts. And unfortunately, in this day and age with cyber, the discount world doesn't really exist. It kind of does, depending on the nature and size of your business, but there's no tangible like you save X% by doing this, right? At least not on a real accessible level to everybody. And so what ends up happening is there are a lot of factors that will go into the pricing, and there are a lot of factors that will alter your pricing
Sure.
and even alter your eligibility for a cyber policy in the first place. And it begins with those security controls, but even the security controls, as I said before, there's no one size fits all. There's a bit of a base standard that we brought up, but then based on different pieces like the revenue and the industry of the client, their past loss history, if they filed claims in the past, Did they do anything since that claim to make sure a claim like that is less likely to happen in the future? Um, those are all questions that carriers want to know. Do they have a formalized, oh, they went through a claim and they didn't have a formalized incident response plan? Well, do they now? Like, they want to know
Yeah,
these things.
I'm curious. You're given great examples,
Mhm,
and they're very direct, right? Do they have an incident response? Do they have 2FA, right? It CIS is very broad,
mhm.
covers a lot more than just one or two things. Do you feel that the cyber insurer process is limiting itself because becomes so fixated on just the few things they've seen matter instead of looking at the broader picture?
I think again, it goes back to the reality that I wouldn't call it limited as much as I'd called it very specific.
Okay.
Um, they're I mean, when you look at any MSP who's filled out an insurance form, there are some of these carriers have 14 pages of security control questions, and I am willing to bet that the majority of those controls exist on the CIS framework. I don't know where they're getting. Some of them don't make any sense. And they're saying things like, do you, not that they don't make sense, but no one
Yeah.
does them in a normal security space. Like, do you put 2FA on your routers and switches? Like, you can do that, sure, but who's doing that? Right? Not that many people. I'm sure some do. And if you're one of those MSPs who does, great, you're super secure. But they're pulling all this information because they're collecting all this data. So the reason it's so specific is because they've asked all these questions, yes or no questions, and a lot of them have been filled out. And then they're looking at their loss history and they're saying, okay, based on all those yes or no answers, what were the risk profiles that saw the most significant hits? So they're so specific because they're based on very specific instances, right? But
Hmm.
it's becoming broad. I wouldn't say it's becoming broader, but it is becoming more encompassing. But that's the interesting thing about insurance is I have worked with clients who are required to be CMMC level 3 compliant. That's a
Oh,
lot, but they still were not considered a good risk to the insurance carrier because their backup solution wasn't specific enough, and they didn't have they had a formalized vulnerability management plan, right? That's what CMMC
okay.
requires, but
Hmm.
they didn't have the formalized requirement was not within the time frame that the carrier was looking for. Right. So a lot of times the carriers will take it a step further than what compliance requires. But then in other cases, you have CIS controls saying you need to have this, and the carriers are like, I
Hmm.
don't care about that. Right? It's weird. It's
That
all over
that
the place.
balance doesn't make any sense to me, right? Because I consider CMMC, even more locked down or harder to achieve than CIS. But in some cases you've seen, insurance is ahead of the game. So that's a lot to take in right there. I
All
don't know
over
what
the
to make of
place,
that,
man.
man.
And that's the only that I keep coming back to the fact that they are basing their requirements off of their specific experiences. And we have to give it time. And that's where we say it's behind. We have to give it time to continue to play out because in reality, 2020 was 3 years ago. So they've only been asking these questions for 3 years. And that and really they're basing their requirements off of 2 years of past underwriting data. So it's only now that they're really getting to the point where they're saying, okay, wait, we're actually getting consistent data, but it's still in the baby stage for sure.
So let me ask the question: how far out are we from a cyber insurance threat intel report of 2023? Or cyber insurance players working with their data, working with CIS to make recommendations. Will that ever happen?
It might for very specific. So here's a good. I mean, if you had to use another framework, FTC safeguard rules,
Sure.
right? If you're an auto dealer and you are supposed to adhere by the FTC safeguards, then a carrier wants to know that. Like they want to know that you're doing that, right? So it's not just check these couple of boxes and you're good. I think it's going to be the same way on some level. You look at CIS, you see that it's easy to follow. What I think is going to happen, and what is happening, is you have all these carriers that exist out there, and they're traditional carriers. They're very formalized in the way they do things, and a lot of people are emerging, or they're called MGAs. I'm going to avoid all definitions and stuff, but basically, like specialized carriers are uh, uh, emerging that specifically understand the risk in a way that is very different than the traditional carrier market. So you're seeing a lot of these specialized cyber insurance products become available because they're more in line with the realities of cybersecurity, right? And I think when you talk about CIS and its connection to cyber insurance, you're probably going to see it come out that way before it hits the mainstream carrier market. That'd be my thing. That'd be what I think.
I like that a lot.
That's my prediction.
That's a good prediction. And we mentioned this before, but getting to work with the MSP, you get to learn more about their security stack and what's going on with the end client. Does the vendors a security MSP minded MSP use take into effect? Do you care about that as an insurer? What stack they're using, what agents are on the device? Is that part of the process?
So, well, first of all, just to clarify, Fifthwall is currently not an insurer, although it's coming. We're just a wholesaler, but most insurers will ask they'll ask specifics like, do you use an EDR tool? Do you have an MDR
Okay.
tool? Is it 24/7? Do you have backups? Are they immutable backups? Are they encrypted in transit and at rest? Like, they ask these questions to describe the product, but not at most carriers. There are some, but most carriers are not asking about the specific product you're using. Some of them do have kind of a list that they consider to be kind of the ones that they've vetted as good options for those products. But even then, there's usually a write-in option where you can write it in. And again, I think a lot of that is still data collection. Like, if
Hmm.
they see a particular vendor get written in a lot, and then they also start to see a lot of incidents with that particular vendor, that might cause them to have a couple of flags. But as of right now, um, I mean, if you were to look at it at a real basic level, like a real plain level, they're looking at it and saying, "Look, we don't know who this I don't know, let's use EDR again, who this EDR vendor is, but what we do know is that everyone who has EDR has way
Has
fewer expensive claims because they're cut off sooner than people who don't. And so we just want to see that they have it, right? And
so
that's kind of where it is right now.
these insurers they're not using superficial metrics. These are real data points, and it sounds like they're using them effectively. It's just not necessarily a comprehensive security framework. They're leveraging real data points to draw real conclusions, but they're not the globally accepted conclusions that CIS or other frameworks have made.
Which to your point, which I think is why it's such a hassle sometimes for
Mm-hmm.
MSPs, because they could be doing everything they need to do to get clients to adhere to a particular framework,
Mm-hmm.
and then insurance comes along and says, "Wow, that's great. You have really good security, but we also want to see this." It's like,
Yep.
wait a minute, I just sold my client on getting all the way IG1 compliant, and now you're saying that they also need this, and it's just that's the kind of thing where. Um, it can cause confusion. And that's where we like to help out, is to say, look, you got to think of this as something. I call it the cyber insurance framework because it is disconnected from all those other ones. It's still connected in the sense that there are similar lines of questioning,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but because carriers are basing their requirements on their personalized data, there are going to be differences than a global standard, at least right now. And that's why cyber is the Wild West.
Yeah, still is. And let's talk about the cyber insurer framework. Let's go to this next slide here. This is the business case for CIS, but we keep on saying CIF, which I love. And this is where I think Fifth Wall and the stories you've shared are very unique to you, because you're not only helping that MSP bring the conversation of insurance to their clients, you're also encouraging them, if not telling them to, hey, bring up insurance and allow that to be the launch pad for the greater security discussion. So, talk to us a little bit more about that process and where CIS comes into play with that.
Well, I mean, you're the CIS expert here. So there is part of it where, I guess, on my end, on a very basic level, right? By establishing yourself as an MSP that helps clients not only so I like to use the phrases or the words responder versus advisor, right?
Hmm.
And when you are just purely stuck in the response phase as an MSP, where almost like you're not great at sales, you struggle with that side of things. So really it comes down to, well, if my client has an issue or they have a contract that's requiring additional security, then I'll get it implemented. It'll happen. Or there's an incident. Oh, shoot,
Hmm.
time to clean up the mess. Oh, wouldn't it have been great if you had this control in place already? Whereas I think the framework approach now helps you kind of move into that advisor role. And whether you like it or
Mhm.
not, most MSPs need to be offering a deeper level of security than maybe they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's like kind of gone are the days where MSP meant IT person. MSP really means cybersecurity advisor, and it needs to be that role. So it's the shift towards that we're seeing today. And by following a framework like CIS, you're and this is the beauty of frameworks, right? Is they establish you as someone who, one, knows what the heck you're talking about, but two, you're able to guide clients on what they need and why they need it, and the importance of having those things. Insurance kind of fits into that in the sense that, hey, the insurance, and that's the leverage piece. Hey, insurance is
Yep.
requiring that you carry these things, so let's make sure you're at least this tall. But then to have that other framework that like something like CIS that says, um, here are some very clear guidelines to get you to a point where you are considered a good risk, where you and not just a good risk, but your risk is reduced significantly. Um, it helps you have the conversation with business owners so that their mindset kind of shifts away from being sold on something, and they're actually able to see how you're there for the benefit of their business, to help them survive, to help them stay safe from cyber incidents, and to help them navigate the complicated world of cybersecurity.
And all of this, something I try to scream as loud as I can every time. It all goes back to ROI as well, right? Having these in place allows you to understand your risk and mitigate it, and basically have that ROI by following it. So creating, and this is why I asked the question at the start, would you rather become CIS compliant, go through 153 sub controls, or get insurance, right? Getting insurance is going to be the more feasible thing to obtain, and then you continually improve and meet CIS down the line. But the business case for these CIS controls, right, as an MSP, you need to understand where your gaps are and begin to align these vendors to a certain control. Because where is your risk? Where are you accepting the risk? I mean, in your experience as an insurer, do you ask the MSP, hey, on this client, where's their biggest risk? Like, do they know that answer? Have you asked that question before, Will?
I think, yeah, we ask it in a way where it's a lot of times we ask the simple question of like, so what have you been trying to get this client to implement recently?
Hmm.
And they'll say what they want. We're like, so why? And they explain where they see that particular uh, need being in place, right? So yeah, we do.
Hmm.
But when it comes to CIS, I guess that's my question, right? So you did everything you need to do to get insurance. You've gotten that insurance policy. How does following something like CIS now help you in the long run? Because yes, insurance is going to be requiring a little bit more every year, so you can always revisit the conversation there. But what are some of the other benefits on top of just getting some security in place when
Yeah.
you're following something like CIS for your clients? Like, what do you see there?
I, I think CIS can also be, and we talk about the MSP being the advisor to the end client, but CIS as an organization, you sign up for their membership, they can be the advisor to your MSP. They release these business insights, these threat intel recommendations. They talk about is cyber hygiene and how to increase your security posture, right? They're your partner. So I love that Fifth Wall's taken the stance of bringing this top of mind, helping MSPs leverage insurance as a launch pad to talk about greater security initiatives. So
Yeah.
really, really good stuff here. And this next slide here, I mean, this is the question we're all here for. Um, are you insured or are you secure? You know, at the end of the day, if I were to get a cybersecurity policy, can I walk away from that saying the battle's over? I'm good to go. You know, what's your point of view on this?
Oh man, there's so many misconceptions to unpack from this one. This is the simplest slide that we've had this entire webinar, but it is the most in depth. So there's two things here. If you don't have good security, but you have insurance, you should probably ask the question, what the heck does this policy even cover? Because it is not easy today to get a good comprehensive cyber insurance policy if you do not have the right security controls in place. Right? So that leads to an issue because they'll ask oh, I have insurance. Do I really need more security? It's like, well, the answer is yes, because either you have a bad policy that didn't actually require anything, so it only is going to pay out like $10,000 and you're going to be out of money in a day because forensics will blow through that. Or you misrepresented your security posture on your insurance form in the first place, which means if a claim were to come through, it's not going to pay out because you didn't speak truthfully to what your security posture was, right? So there's that element, right? On the other side of it, oh, I'm secured. Do I really need an insurance policy? And this goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning about risk,
Yep.
right? As an MSP, you are you're doing to the best of your ability, and this is where CIS is huge, right? Because if all you're doing is uh, following the cyber insurance framework for your security for your clients, will they be secure? They'll have security, but will they be secure? And that's the question of, if the carriers are basing this all on their own data, they're going to be secure by the standards of the carrier, but are they secure by your standards as an MSP? And if not, how do you get them there, right? And then you have to ask the question though, no matter what level of security I implement, have I completely eliminated their risk? No. And that's why the insurance piece is necessary. And that's why I love that you use the graphic of the scale for this, because both are necessary. You
Hmm.
can't have one, like if you just have security, then that other side, the insurance side, is all the way up here, meaning there's nothing to bring you back down when an incident happens. But if you have the insurance and that's weighing, you're, first of all, you're probably spending way too much on it, which is why it's so heavy. And then two, it's not
should
going to
balance it
protect
out
you.
and pay more on the
Yeah.
security side a little bit. Hmm.
There you go. So it's like the two really work in tandem with each other, and that's why we're so big on pushing that cyber insurance needs to be part of the overall strategy, but it can't be the decider on where your controls stop. Right? You need to constantly be evaluating that, and each risk is different.
Now, a conception about the cyber insurance space, checkbox security, checkbox insurance. You just say, do you have EDR? Check mark, everything, right?
Yep.
In your response to this, you talked about, check marking something. Well, you didn't say check mark, but not attesting to something that was true, right? Saying you had something, and then when they did further investigation, they didn't actually have it in place. Do you have any horror stories or stories to share about insures a business that has a cyber security insurance policy that actually did a test incorrectly?
I mean, there's that article that came out last summer that we love to tout on our calls because it really represents the importance of this. There was a business that underwent a cyber incident,
Hmm.
and they claimed they claimed on their form that they had MFA in place. And if anyone's ever been through a cyber incident, the first thing that happens is that, yeah, legal gets involved, and then they send in a forensics team. And the forensics team is supposed to find out exactly how far reaching the incident is, but they're also going to look at what caused it in the first place. And what they determined was there was no MFA enabled, but they said there was MFA enabled. So that makes it pretty clear now that that company voided their contract. And because they did that, they didn't have coverage, right? So that's the other piece with a framework that I think is so helpful, is it provides accountability to you as the MSP and to the clients. Like, hey, when the client comes to you and they say, oh, well, MFA is really annoying, can I just turn it off? You can say, you can point to a higher power now. You can point to the framework and you can say, look, no, all of my clients have to be aligned. Can I just sign something? Nope, that's not how this works. Um, like, I understand we live in this world where people want to say, oh, well, I'll let them sign a liability waiver and that'll just
I've
but
heard that constantly.
oh
Just
yeah,
have them sign something acknowledging that they're not doing it. That
right.
doesn't seem like a good approach to me.
No, and I mean, when you think you're an MSP, right, your job, again, risk reduction. By getting them to sign, yeah, maybe you're reducing your own risk of a
Personal
lawsuit,
risk.
but you're actually taking a step back on what you're supposed to be doing and reducing your client's risk by saying, hey, yeah, sign this thing, I don't want to deal with it. And I get it, there's probably clients out there who you get these controls in place, and then they get really they get in your ear and they're like, hey, this is really annoying, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off. So that's where I've seen that the framework approach can be really helpful. It says, hey, look, no, we adhere to this framework, and if you step away from this, you've actually stepped away from the framework, and that greatly increases your risk. So we can't take that step, right? So you have something else to point to other than your own sales.
So a big thing that I've been talking about in my weekly webinars is this concept of reporting, documentation, and everything. When these forensic, I mean, say the breach does happen, right? Cyber insurance wants proof, this report. As part of the process to obtain the cyber insurance policy, are they actually reviewing security reports? For example, Senteon, like, hey, and client, do you have a hardened baseline? would that end client then generate a report, show the cyber insurer, or are they just claiming yes, and then if something happens, then they have to prove it?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. Right now, really, that the only thing that carriers are absolutely looking for or scanning, like they're verifying beforehand, is they do these external vulnerability scans that everybody
Hmm. Yep.
hates. Right? Every MSP you talk to, like that doesn't. This is an IP address that doesn't even belong to my client, right? Like they'll say something, you'll see that kind of stuff. Um, so it's a point of pain for a lot of people because those vulnerability scans can be hit or miss. But when it comes to the other controls, you have to think the history of insurance has always been built on good faith. So the conversations have always been good faith
Ah,
agreements. But here's the thing, you're entering into a contract. So I'm getting to something else here. But first of all, from the client perspective, when you fill out an application and sign that application and pay your premium, you have now entered into a contract. A contract has two parties, right? It's not just the insurance company. The insurance company is not obligated to pay out if you do not uphold your end of the contract, right? So that's looking at it on a real basic level. So everyone, we live in the cyber age where every MSP wants automation, they want simplicity, they want push button get banana solutions. Like that's how they want it. The reality is, going back in time to what insurance always has been, is it is a good faith contract. So you say, this is what I've got. You submit it, you sign, you pay the premium, and then you don't actually have it. Well, now you voided your contract. Like that's on you, the end client, right? Now, that's all to say, cybersecurity is its own beast, and it's a little
mhm.
different from saying, "Oh yes, I have a car that I replaced the brakes on last year." Right? It's a little different. So, and because they literally can be turned on or off at the flip of a switch, or an MSP could be troubleshooting and turn off MFA and forget to turn it back on. Like there's a lot more. You don't remove the daytime running lights from your car without a lot of work, but turning off MFA is a lot easier. So it's like things like that. So there are pushes in the industry, again, from those more specialized insurance companies, to have what's called continuous underwriting, where there's, whether it's installing an agent, which a
Sure.
lot of people don't love, or API calls, or different options to actually verify that the security controls are in place that should be in place. The beauty of that is, one, they won't be able to turn it off or they'll get pinged. Or
Yep.
two, and I think this is the real beauty, is the insurance application process is going to be so much easier because now you're
It's
not
going to
filling
be
out all these.
definite.
Yeah,
Everything's verified. Hmm.
you don't have to check all the yes or no boxes anymore because they literally can run a scan. Boom, 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 boom. We see all the controls that are in place. Checks our boxes. Sign this application form, and you're good to go. Right, and then they can continue to monitor it over time, and that's going to be the key. Is, hey, the thing you're signing now is not, do you have all of these things and do you attest to them? The thing you're signing now says, do you agree to keep these things in place?
You have them today and will continue to have them tomorrow and ever after.
Yes.
That's one of the big challenges we've seen. So I work with a lot of MSPs, not necessarily for cyber insurance directly, but a lot of regulated, so PCI,
Sure.
CMMC, and whatnot. And in these frameworks, they say have the ability to track changes. We work with OS configurations, browser configurations, and all that jazz. And what's been passing these compliance audits so far is multiple point in time vulnerability scans. And the question that I always ask the MSP, hey, if they're asking for change tracking, are they going to care about what happens in between this scan versus that scan? What's actual continuous mean? And I think that's an area, not just cyber insurance, but also regulated space has to mature. And because the definition of continuous to me is 24/7, ongoing, not point in time, not when I feel like doing the scan. It's continuous. So it's really interesting that you're also seeing that parallel in the cyber insurance space, that you need that continuous.
Continuous is such a, it's such a broad term in the
Yep.
tech, like even like API calls for personal phone apps in order to sync calendars or things like that. They're like, Keep your calendar synced," and then you can look at it and it's like, "How often would you like to sync?" "Every 24 hours." It's like, this is not continuous.
Yep. Yep.
If my wife
Exactly.
schedules something same day, I'm not going to see it.
Exactly.
So it's like
Uh,
that kind of thing. So, but you're right, and I think that's where it's going to be that question, and there's going to be in the insurance space, there's going to have to be parameters put on that, so it's not just um hey, we're continuously monitoring your MFA on these different things, and if it gets turned off, we're going to ping you immediately. It's probably gonna they're probably gonna have some
Where's the
gap.
line? Yeah, then there's a line. Are they an insurance provider? Are they an MSP? Or why are
They're
they
probably gonna have
alerting me
some sort of
now?
gap that says like, hey, after 72 hours, if you haven't turned it back on, we're canceling your policy or something like that, right? Where they give
I
them a
like that. I
yeah,
like that future. And
yeah.
talking of the future, let's highlight this next slide here. A possible misconception that I had, rewards for having strong security. And we can pull up that next slide here. Um, if you do have a hardened CIS compliant machine enterprise, sounds like insurance does care and that they will acknowledge it because their goal is security to an extent by that response you gave on the last slide. But is there rewards for it? Are they maturing to the point, just like car insurance, saying, hey, if you don't drive during the night hours, we'll give you a discount, right? Safe driver program and whatnot. Is cyber insurance doing that today? Is it going that way?
Definitely going that way again with those specialized companies. But where you really see the discounting, and I'm not going to call it something tangible because again, tangible discounts don't exist. You'll save 10% by taking a defensive driving course. You're not going to save
Mhm.
10% by taking security awareness training. Um, what you are going to do is depending on the nature of the business. So I brought up revenue before, right? So like if you're a $200 million company and you have 15 days of business interruption, the carriers are looking at that and they're saying that's a lot of income lost versus a $1 million company who has 15 days of business interruption. The payout's going to look very different for the insurance carrier, right? So when it comes to the importance of security controls and the cost savings found in that, if you are a larger company, it is absolutely crucial that you get some of those additional security controls in place that may not be required to get the policy, but you'll see
Sure.
cost savings because the carrier will see the carrier will see this now really good risk in front of them and they'll say, hey, we're not going to charge you $150,000 for this policy. We're going to charge you $50,000 for this policy. Still sounds like a lot. I'd love $50,000 in my bank account, but the reality is it's way cheaper because you've
Hmm.
just taken the time to implement a few strategies that I guarantee are not going to cost you $100,000. So you're going to end up saving money in the long run. You'll be better protected. You'll be spending less money on your policy. It all plays out really well.
So it's not necessarily like you said a direct tangible 30% off, right, for doing this, but
Not yet.
having these and not yet having these and being able to prove that will go into their premiums, right?
Yes,
That's awesome.
exactly.
And I guess again, a lot of these are future trends and predictions. Do you think there'll ever actually be alignment between cyber insurance and CIS? Like for example, we joke about the checkbox and everything. Could there ever be 153 checkboxes one day and saying, "Hey, how do you meet this sub control?"
Um, I don't know. So maybe, at least, and this is broadly speaking, um, CIS exists for a reason. Someone looked at the data and they said, "Oh, this actually provides very optimal cybersecurity, and it sets you up to be considered, uh, or to lower your risk significantly." Right. So that exists because the data exists and someone compiled the data and they put together the CIS framework, right? So that's why it exists. So
Hmm.
if carriers are doing this on their own time, I could see eventually some sort of convergence where their real-time data eventually meets what the data put together for the CIS controls also said, right? I mean,
It
that's
could almost validate CIS's recommendations one day because
yeah,
insurance has, I can't say insurance has more data, but maybe one day insurance will have more data than CIS. I don't know if that's possible, but maybe they will, right? And then basically insurance become that validating body to CIS. You
right.
never know. Anything can happen.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have, so that's one piece. You then have the specialized carriers who maybe a couple of them who say, I'm going to go start my own insurance program. One of the things that they do is that they actually map their security requirements off of CIS. I could see that being a very reasonable approach. Right. And then, I mean, lastly, there are like the baseline insurance requirements that exist out there. Those are currently all part of the CIS framework. It's not obviously it's not the totality of CIS, but when you look at the actual required cybersecurity controls, they all exist on the CIS framework,
They
and there's a
could
reason
map
for that.
back to it.
Yes,
Hmm.
very much so. So if you're following, and this is the one key I would take away, is if you're leading your clients, even IG1, if you're leading your clients to implement the CIS framework, then they're probably going to be considered a good risk to the insurance carrier. And that's a good place to be, because now, let's say you've been trying really hard to push CIS on your clients, or in your head, you're like,
Sure.
I want to lead my clients security using the CIS framework. You now have the additional leverage to say, hey, and also by following this, you're going to be considered a better risk to insurance carriers, which is going to bring your premiums down, going to set you up to get better coverages. And, if you work with Fifthwall, hey, we have a partner who can make sure that happens, right? But at the end of the day, you are now helping your clients become a better risk to the insurance carrier by following the CIS framework.
Yep. And I love you said this on a little bit ago, but you're lowering those premiums so you have more budget to allocate to better security, right? And me and you, we sit up here, practitioners, and we know this is possible, right? But there are challenges. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. Hey, I'm just going to go meet CIS. My client's going to be thrilled. Better security. I want this for an extra $50, $100 a seat. I'm going to get proper security. They're not going to jump at that. So let's highlight this next slide here, and let's bring things a little bit back to reality. Things are hard. There are challenges for MSPs to actually meet CIS, and I want to highlight some of these. And the first point I actually listed here ties back to the vendors, right? Will, I'm sure you know plenty of vendors out there, but the ones I know, and I've worked with quite a few of them, a lot of times they don't know where their solution maps back to CIS. If the vendor themselves, who's selling a solution to help do a security function, doesn't know where they fit into the framework that MSPs are trying to follow, that's a challenge. And shout out to what Matt Lee's doing with a CIS working group to help make this top of mind and make this a conversation. But I mean, that right there is a challenge. How is an MSP supposed to create a security stack to a framework if the vendors themselves don't know?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a great question. They're a great point. I mean, I think that's really what it comes down to is if you're going to align with a security framework, you need to make sure you're using vendors that also align to that framework. And if they don't have the knowledge, it doesn't necessarily mean that their product's bad, but it does mean that you don't know if their product checks the boxes that you need checked. So
Mhm.
that's you could go explore all that information yourself, or you could find a vendor that actually has that info for you.
Yep, exactly. And another point that makes it challenging, a lot of these times, and hopefully not a lot, I have seen it though, the end client of the MSP may have additional security that the MSP themselves don't have. The concept of eat your own dog food. I
Hmm.
mean, if you are on this mission to sell CIS and doing it for the right reasons, security reasons, and not just to raise your bottom line, I mean, what about doing this internally? We'll go through the process first on your own, identify those gaps, and then start to bring the conversation. And I think a lot of the conversations I've had is, hey, my client doesn't want to talk about security. They don't want to. They don't want it. They don't want to pay for it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to learn about it. I don't know if that's completely true. I agree they probably don't want to pay for it. But I have noticed a trend, and I'm curious if you've seen this too, where even my family members or just general people will bring up cybersecurity topics. If an MSP came to you and said, hey, I want to introduce to you this security framework called CIS, do you think they'd be receptive, or am I being arrogant to the reality of the world?
Um, Unfortunately, we live in a world where a lot of people are convinced by fear. And
Hmm.
I hate to say that cybersecurity exists because there is plenty, and not that it exists, the awareness of cybersecurity exists because there is such uh there's a lot of news about things that have happened because of poor cybersecurity or just mistakes, right? So people are very aware of it. I mean, you think of some of the major businesses and organizations that have been hit with ransomware in the past year, right? So
Hmm.
everyone's aware that it exists. So when you bring it up, it's not like my family is not the most tech savvy people, well, some of them anyway, but they know about cybersecurity because,
Yeah,
well, one, I work
that's
in
the
it,
point.
but
Hmm.
also they hear enough about it that's like, oh, this actually is a real thing. So it carries weight. Now to bring up CIS as a an MSP to a business owner, it literally goes along with that conversation point of, look, cybersecurity, the importance of having the right stuff in place, and there's actually a framework that exists for this that tells you how to get there. Um, and that I think validates you, because now you're not just making baseless recommendations on security. You're following something that's established, that's based on data, and that helps take the client kind of to the next level, because they're basing all of their cybersecurity understanding on what they see on the news,
Yep.
right? So, oh well, I'm basing my recommendations on this framework that exists, not based on what I just think everybody's doing.
There's no need for solution selling anymore. I mean, maybe there is. There's the one-off, so they get a specific software as a specific use case. But for security, what's stopping an MSP from selling the framework and then
Yeah.
talking about the solutions to get there? I feel like you sell the framework, you implement the solutions, cyber insurance, easy. Is that not the flow? I mean, that's to me how it should be. It's just not reality today, is it?
Well, MSPs have the challenging job too of working alongside clients to provide, well, they should be doing this. A lot of them struggle, I know, but to provide a budget for cybersecurity for their clients, so to work through it. I mean, setting a budget with the client is really important. So it can be hard to probably dump the entire CIS framework on a client all at once, but it gives you the roadmap. So help the clients see the path forward, help them lay out what the cost is going to be over time, and say, hey, this is where I'd like to get you by the end of the calendar year. This is where I'd like to get you by the end of Q1.
Mm-hmm.
This is how much it's going to cost you. Hey, I know that April and May tend to be slower months for your business, so let's try to get a couple of things implemented prior to that, and that way you can have quarter two off from implementing better security, right? And just things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So,
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And I think it's amazing to hear what Fifthwall's doing and bringing CIS, I mean, not CIS directly sometimes, but bringing security top of mind from the security insurance perspective, working with MSPs. I mean, kudos to you guys and your business model. I think this was really insightful to me. I mean, right? To, for me to come in here, know very little about insurance. I didn't realize that insurers want it to be your partner, at least in this case, your business model, right? I mean, I didn't know about this. I thought it was still check marks, but thank you for the insightful session with you, Will.
yeah, insurance is fun, at least sometimes. No, but this was awesome. So good to connect. That was a fast hour. So, um, good times. But thanks
We
for bringing
made
us
it
on.
great.
And real quick, if anyone wants to hear about Fifth Wall, just go to fifthwallsolutions.com/MSP. There's a form there you can fill out, and we're happy to connect with you and have some conversations. But to Zach's point, I mean, if you're following the CIS framework, regardless of if you work with Fifth Wall or not, you're in a good place for your clients to get cyber insurance. So no framework, to my knowledge, requires cyber insurance. That's not part of any of them. So I would probably say it's still really good to explore that option. It's just like we said, that whole scale slide. I'm telling you, it's the most important slide in the whole thing. So,
It's not just paperwork. There's security to it. It's the
yep,
balance, and really, really appreciate that. We'll drop those links into the comments as well. Will make sure to do that after the episodes, and please connect with us. We do our best to be active. I think both of our main social media is LinkedIn, so very happy to be active there. We'll continue to post, and if I do my job over December, I may try to make some memes and keep up with you, Will.
good luck.
All right, brother. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks, everybody.